welcome to the MECFS Underground. My name is Scott Schneider. Thank you for joining me. And of course, you can find out more information about MECFS by going to my website, mecfsunderground.com. I finally get to make a video after 3 months. It's been a long 3 months. And I'm going to talk about that in future videos, even though a lot of it I was dealing with ties into what we're going to talk about today. And that is post-exertional malaise. Now, many of you, of course, are very familiar with post-exertional malaise and its effects on you, and the things that you struggle with in regard to it. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to explain to you some revealing things about post-exertional malaise. What creates it, what causes it, and what it is that you can glean from understanding it better, so that you can take that insight and you can actually into your illness management and learn how to, if you haven't already, certainly figure out how to get your PEM under control, and then also keep yourself from falling into PEM, as well as improve your actual ability to control some of your illness symptoms. And of course, no guarantees here. I don't guarantee cures, nothing like that. But I think that in the end here of these series of videos, you're going to find some very useful information that's going to perhaps make a big difference in your life in regard to how you can help yourself manage your PEM better, and therefore manage your MECFS. And the way we can do that is we can start to define what PEM is, and we can look into a little bit into the body, energy, and chemistry, and what causes PEM in the setting of MECFS, and how you can take that information and go and better yourself, or better your understanding and your how you deal with PEM and how you look at PEM every day, so that you can change what it does to you and put a little bit more control in your life on the seemingly and largely unstable nature of post-exertional malaise. If we can define it and we can make it into something that's relatable, it can make it easier to detect what it is when it's happening and how it can be actually managed and prevented. So when we start out talking about PEM, we have to begin by discussing the body's energy production sources, and particularly how those types of body energy source production sources relate to aerobic impairment. Now, we're going to define aerobic impairment as we go along here, and I'm going to put a couple of slides up that are going to show exactly what I'm talking about. But basically, aerobic impairment is going to be the lack of ability of your body to use oxygen to produce energy. Now, how that factors into MECFS and how it creates PEM involves a lot of different complex processes, but we can break those down by beginning to address what they are and where they come from. So, our basic body energy processes involve three different sources of fuel production from foods that we break down and eat. And that's going to be the creatine phosphagen system, the anaerobic system, and the aerobic system. Now, the phosphagen system is targeted toward very quick bursts of speed and power because it goes away very quickly. The phosphagen stores in your body are in the muscle, and they are depleted very rapidly. So when we start activity or we get up and do anything that involves very quick traumatic movements, we're using the phosphagen system. But the phosphagen system lasts maybe 10 seconds. So then the body has to rely on a couple of other systems that has to kick in and begin to rely on anaerobic and also aerobic energy production. So when we talk about basic energy processes in the body and the three that I just mentioned, we're basically talking about the production and use of what's called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate, and if many of you can go back to your biology class, many of you are probably too old to even remember a lot of this, what you were learning there. So I'm going to give you a refresher course. ATP is the main source the body uses for energy production. Adenosine triphosphate, it's a very complex molecule with a whole bunch of different little working parts. And the main function of ATP is to actually be metabolized in our body cells for energy. What happens is now ATP is something that is taken from the food that you eat and the fluid that you drink. Food's broken down into carbohydrates, and there are different types of carbohydrates. They have different complexities and chemical makeups, and we're not going to go into those at all today. It's too much. But basically what happens is that the carbohydrates are broken down into glycogen, which is released into your bloodstream after you eat, and your body takes whatever it is that it needs at that time for immediate energy production, and then the rest is stored in the liver for when that energy is used up, and then your blood sugar drops. So the liver kicks in and sends that glycogen into your bloodstream again to give your body a metabolic boost. Now, with ATP, once your food is broken down into different complex chemicals, those are sent, of course, into through the bloodstream into the body cells. And we're talking about body cells, we're talking about everything. We're talking about muscles, we're talking about internal organs. All of them take in the nutrients we eat, broken down, of course, a lot of them, including in large part glucogen, and they utilize that to produce ATP, and in the process of producing ATP, derive energy from that chemical process and development. And then they also take ATP, break it down, and then recycle it. Now, there's a lot of complex process. I mean, there are a lot of processes in this, and I can't even tell you. I literally spent, with all the research I did for this video, hundreds of. I mean, it's just, it's not something that you have to know in order to manage your ME/CFS or your PEM. It's a lot of different chemical processes that break down and are used in a lot of different ways, and it's really a lot of just too much to remember. It was very staggering for me to do all the research for this video in that sense and find out all the chemical processes that go into it, and the complexities, and molecules, and electrons, and there's a bunch of different things that are very that really go on in the body that create the energy processes that we need to survive and live. And it's actually very fascinating and amazing, but it's not something that, of course, we're going to go into in this video at all. Having said all of that, the products that we take in to produce energy in our cells, and particularly when the cells take that energy, the glucogen and other nutrients, and produce energy and produce the functions of the cell is called cellular respiration. Now, with cellular respiration, there are two different types in most all cells of the body. In fact, there's the anaerobic and the aerobic, as I mentioned before. Now, when you get up off the couch and you start movement, what tends to happen is the phosphagen system kicks in right away, so it lifts you off the couch, you start moving. Then that's used up very quickly, so then the body begins to access the anaerobic energy system a little bit more, because of the fact that the phosphagen creatine system has to be replenished. So now, with anaerobic, that means without oxygen. So your cells, and particularly in the case of movement, your muscle cells, will actually access this glycogen inside the cells, and they will begin the process of cellular respiration and break that down. But what they will do is break it down without the presence of oxygen, because at that time your aerobic processes are just beginning to kick in. So there's some aerobic there, but there's mostly anaerobic, and that can last for 3 to 30 minutes. So you get up off the couch, you walk into the next room, you're kind of using more anaerobic, and your aerobic is just very, very minimal, but it starts to ramp up. You walk into that room, and let's say hypothetically a person without ME/CFS starts doing jumping jacks. So all of a sudden that anaerobic energy usage will begin to switch over to aerobic, and then aerobic takes over completely as they continue to do the jumping jacks. This is within several minutes here after the anaerobic begins to pass, because the anaerobic and the phosphagen get used up, and the body starts to kick in with aerobic, because that is actually the main source of the body's energy production, which, again, all of this is in the form of ATP production. So when we think about the person hypothetically doing jumping jacks, they're switching into aerobic. Now, aerobic means with oxygen. And it has been documented with science over the past 5 years that people with ME/CFS, for various number of reasons we don't understand yet, have an inability to process and create energy aerobically, and that is in the cell, in the mitochondria. We get into the cell and we talk about energy production. Now, energy production occurs not just in your muscles and your movement, but throughout your body. Your organs, your lungs, your heart, your kidneys, your brain, they all need to access energy. And in the terms of ME/CFS, we're always thinking of things in terms of movement. But we have to understand that the body's metabolic processes also involve what goes on internally outside of our movement. So if we're to look inside a cell, there's the cell's cytoplasm is the membranous area surrounding the nucleus, so that it's basically the cell nucleus, and then outside the cell, the center of the cell, you have the components that you use to carry out a lot of the cell's processes. The nucleus, of course, is used for the cell division and has all of the cell DNA. And inside that cell, you not only have the cytoplasm, but you have what's called mitochondria. And mitochondria, little sausage-shaped organs that are present in most cells, all cells of the body, except for the red blood cells. And that's something we'll talk about in another video. But as far as that goes, the mitochondria, there are literally, depending upon the cell's energy needs and what part of the body they're from, there literally could be just a few hundred in your skin cells to 2,000 in your liver and 5,000 in some other parts of the body that really need to use up a lot of energy. And so they're tiny little things, and there are a whole bunch of them in the cell. Now, the important takeaway regarding mitochondria is that they are the powerhouse of the cell, and they really are pretty much what we derive a lot of our energy from. And the reason why we do is because mitochondria actually take the oxygen that we breathe in and then burn that with the components of our food breakdown in the form of ATP, or and produce energy using that ATP. So if we go into the cell where we are, the importance of the mitochondria cannot be understated in regard to ME/CFS. And I'm sure many of you know about this mitochondrial issues that come with ME. But what is really the bottom line when it comes to mitochondria and what problems it presents for people with our disease? The mitochondria use oxygen, again, for processing energy in the body. And in doing so, produce far more ATP than out of any glucose molecule, out of a glucose molecule, than anaerobic. It's basically the products of your food breakdown in the form of glycogen go into your cells in the cytoplasm, and when you are engaging in movement, they're broken down anaerobically into what's called pyruvate. The pyruvate then is, and then in the process of that, you yield a couple of molecules of ATP, and that releases energy in the process. That pyruvate then is then taken in, absorbed by the mitochondria, where it is through a whole bunch of even more complex chemical processes, burned in the presence of oxygen, and produces ATP as well. But the really big takeaway, the real important thing to know, is that in cellular respiration, there's a huge difference between the energy that is derived from anaerobic respiration versus aerobic respiration. So the anaerobic respiration produces, again, as I said, 2 ATP, but the aerobic respiration produces 34 to 38 ATP. And out of all of that, obviously we derive a lot more energy from that process versus anaerobic. So if we're going to go ahead and look at that in the context of ME/CFS, your movement, the movement of any normal human being, is largely dependent upon those 3 energy processes, the phosphagen, anaerobic, and aerobic. However, in ME/CFS, the ability for us to use oxygen to be metabolized in our various cells throughout the body, for whatever reason, is inhibited. It's impaired. So that's what we talk about when we say aerobic impairment. So we can't derive oxygen from aerobic movement or aerobic exercise and turn it into ATP. So we're unable to produce a huge source of energy that powers most all of the human beings, no matter what kind of disease they have, unless, of course, it's something that involves a mitochondrial dysfunction, which is being much less implicated with ME/CFS. It used to be that it was a theory that was widely looked into, but then in doing research found out that the mitochondria actually are working just fine in our cells. So it's not the mitochondria that's the issue. It's actually there's something that's blocking the ability for the cell, the mitochondria, to take in oxygen and have it produce inside mitochondria to burn that pyruvate that turns into the ATP. And that is something that still needs to be researched and needs to be figured out, because that's really where we are with that particular development and part of ME/CFS. The reason why the oxygen production in regard to cellular respiration is capped or cut off or isn't processing properly in people with ME/CFS has more to do, it appears, with metabolic pathways versus the mitochondria themselves. And we talked about all the different ways of producing energy, the phosphagen, the anaerobic, the aerobic, and other things that the cell needs to carry out, or different cells in the body need to carry out in order to function, the human body to function. Those take particular complex breakdowns of those nutrients and molecules and electrons and ions to turn them into energy, and then also when they do this, to create the products of metabolism that go with it, that circulate back into your system and then replenish, break down the ATP and develop waste products and derive other things from it, and then are put back into the cells again for more ATP production. So those complex breakdowns of processes involving enzymes and proteins and other things in the presence of different energy sources, those are called metabolic pathways. And in ME/CFS, metabolic pathways are somehow messed up in the the use of and production of oxygen in the mitochondria. It's not production, I apologize. In the use of oxygen in the mitochondria to produce ATP.